Hey Caleb, it's Lori here. Thanks so much for your video. I really liked what you had to share about Iowa, and glad you were able to find a source, when you couldn't find or didn't seem like the board regulations were easy to find for you at all. So I'm just talking about this common disciplinary issues for counselors. You mentioned non-reporting of past crimes as being one of the common reasons for disciplinary action. And I saw that coming up for Oregon as well. I saw several cases of that where someone, had a past arrest or, some sort of involvement in a crime, and they didn't disclose it, either when applying for licensure, basically, and somehow they either still got licensed or their license got denied. There were different situations. So somehow it came up later that it got found out, of course, and then their license they were subjected to various disciplinary actions. Sometimes their license was revoked or something like that. So don't remember all the ones, but yeah, it was coming up fairly common. It wasn't the most common one, but I saw it there. Licensure is a very open and thorough process, I'm seeing. So, when other authoritative bodies are involved, like, police and courts and things like that, you gotta know as a counselor applying for licensure that this stuff could come out. I mean, it's like some public record or records that can be found, especially in this electronic age. You can find out a lot of information about people. So it really makes no sense, to not disclose this. I mean, maybe people were just so afraid of, or so desperate or whatever to get their license, but it really doesn't make any sense. So I'm kind of surprised, but maybe it's happening less and less now. Maybe this was a number of years ago. I'm kind of curious about it. So, and kind of curious if, did the board just do a search on that, which certainly could happen, or was there like a disgruntled client who decided to find out more about this particular counselors that were in these situations? It's kind of interesting to wonder how that came about. So, and then about self-care, you mentioned being aware, monitoring your own abilities and vulnerabilities when impairment seems to be an issue, and being aware of our impairment. And I agree with you, obviously with that. And also you mentioned getting others involved, supervisors and such, colleagues, to be aware of that, which is something I mentioned in my video too, video response, that definitely, bringing other people into our lives to help us kind of monitor ourselves and to be open to the feedback, because sometimes it's hard to hear that we need help with things. It can be hard to face and admit. We can be in denial of our own impairment and stress effects, so others can help identify that for us, and we need to be, understand that we need to be open to that. So our text, Remley text, mentions some strategies on page 164 about dealing with that there's a variety of things we can do to try to remain competent while impaired, and some of those, like seeking counseling for ourselves, seeking supervision as mentioned, especially if there's difficult clients that are stressing you out, and like what is it that's causing the impairment, and looking at that, taking a break or vacation from practice, joining a peer support group, getting exercise, meditating, what's in your bucket, like what kind of hobbies and things you enjoy to do, and taking advantage of those, seeking support from family and friends. So good list of things. And you mentioned that, so your question was whether yearly continuing education is still required if an impaired counselor is taking a break from practice, with those yearly expectations. That's a really good question. I was actually trying to find out, an actual answer to that, which I'm sure exists somewhere. I just couldn't find it exactly. But I would think, like their competence at this time is maybe called into question, depending on the impairment and what's going on. And maybe their education will center around enhancing competence. So like, what is expected of impaired counselors, and based on those expectations, maybe there's things that they can do around this. I did find a good article by Gerard Lawson et al. Called "Towards a Culture of Counselor Wellness," and what their task force proposed to do is actually look at it not in terms of like focusing on the counselor impairment, but they were designing basically a project to teach counselors to strengthen and maintain their overall wellness. So how can they increase their wellness and do this in like a preventative way, not just a you know, after impairment has happened kind of way, but, you know, both, like on both sides. It's kind of a strengths-based reframe to focus on building and maintaining counselor wellness and doing that as a regular part of practice. Because they talked about the interpretation is that we as counselors are not allowed to have our own vulnerabilities or struggles. We're not supposed to have a bad belly, as they call it. And counselors believe that, you know, because of our training, we should be impervious to stresses and that's absolutely not true. You know, we are subject and vulnerable just like anybody else. And just being aware of what we need for balance. You know, we're just no less vulnerable to in this complicated world, as they call it. So nature of our workplaces is at great risk too. You know, we're hearing a lot of painful and hard things from clients, and really need to be the rock there for them, and that can take a toll if we're not doing what we can to help ourselves. So they basically, their strategies for regular wellness practice. So, you know, maybe the continuing education around that will focus on self-care rather than going to seminars and learning new, you know, DBT techniques or whatever. You know, that might be the focus, and maybe the requirement, obviously, because if there's a question of returning to practice, you know, counselor's going to have to show that they're making some steps, and, you know, and at least doing the work. You know, no one's going to expect anybody to be, you know, completely perfect all the time, but just recognizing when we need to be and going from there. So thank you so much for a really good question. Good thing to look further into and consider for our lives. So take care, Caleb. Bye.